Marcus Hayes writes for the Philadelphia Daily News. Marcus says if you haven't read his articles, he's been on fire this week. Marcus, I always talk to people about, people don't understand writer's block, but when you start writing, it just happens. And with you, you've just been, pumping out articles like you have nothing else to do with your time.
Well, there's been so much sort of dynamic stuff happening around the Philadelphia scene. It's for this time of year, it's a pleasant bonus because this time of year is a vacation time for most sports writers. There's not a lot to talk about unless you're going to Wimbledon.
So, Marcus, let's give a focus on the Sixers here. They drafted Ben Simmons. You wrote a piece earlier this week, and I like I told you on Twitter, I felt vindicated because this is something I've been saying about Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons has modeled himself after LeBron James. And it's not that we're saying he's going to be LeBron James. What we're saying is that for a guy of his size and his skill level, that's like the perfect guy for him to emulate, is it not?
It is. It really is. I mean, people will laugh at this comparison, and it's not perfect. But when you think about what Anthony Mason did for the Knicks a long time ago, where he could sort of play point forward and not be a great shooter but still contribute and rebound and defend, if that's the low end of the spectrum, and LeBron is the high end and Lamar Odom is somewhere in the middle, I don't understand the consternation over the pick. I do understand why everyone wants every single person drafted to be able to hit three-pointers and block shots, but we don't know that he can't. For one thing, he only took 3 in college, and we don't know what he's going to be, and it frustrates the people who are sort of wedded only to analytics because he's not an analytically sexy guy, and he's a difficult guy. Unless you really understand basketball and understand what his eyes are doing and where his body is when it's supposed to be there, he's a hard guy to quantify. But, I mean, I remember when Doug Collins was in Philadelphia, players would come through, and every single player was compared with LeBron because LeBron is the gold standard, despite the fact he doesn't shoot particularly well from outside and certainly from three-point land. He does so many other things well. He helps his teams win. And, that's just the bottom line. That's what he does. And people say, okay, well, Simmons only won 19 games at LSU. They were an uncoached team without a point guard with 3 guys on a team who thought that because Simmons had all those scouts coming watching him, maybe they could catch a ride to the NBA too. It was probably the biggest underachiever in college basketball this year, but it didn't underachieve because Ben Simmons couldn't play or Ben Simmons didn't care.
Ben Simmons did average double-double, Marcus.
I hear you. You're preaching to the choir. He averaged a double-double in the SEC, and, he distributed the ball probably as well or better than he rebounded it, and he did things so effortlessly. That's the thing, especially in the Philadelphia area. If guys aren't considered to be giving it all their all, if they're not falling all over themselves. Chase Utley and Allen Iverson are 2 excellent examples of guys who sort of maximized what they had the way they wanted to maximize it. But part of that maximization was they had to play all out at all times. And Mike Schmidt is an excellent example of a guy who was so gifted and so talented, he made it look easy. Philadelphians don't like guys who make it look easy. They like guys who it seems like a struggle because it's more identifiable that way.
Marcus, I would say that I know we've become enamored with the three-point shot because of the NBA Finals and the Warriors and Steph Curry and all that kind of fancy stuff. But realistically, the three-point shot is not a high percentage shot in basketball terms. So if you have a guy in Ben Simmons, if he doesn't ever hit a three-pointer, but he's shooting 50, 60% from the field, technically that is actually better for your basketball team, is it not?
Well, there's kind of a fine line where, you take the three-point shot and you find the percentage of three-pointers made versus the extra point you get justify the lower shooting percentage. But if you look at a guy like Grant Hill, who, if not for Michael Jordan, would have been, probably the MVP favorite every year, he didn't shoot three-pointers. It's not necessary. It's a bonus. It's excellent. It's an excellent skill to have. But if you build your team around it, and if you ask every single guy to develop that skill over every other, then I think you're sort of missing the boat. All you need is a couple guys that spread the floor. The reason the Golden State Warriors and for a while the Cavaliers were so incredibly lethal this year is because they had 5 or 6 guys who could hit three-pointers. But you can't build your team around guys who only hit three-pointers.
We're talking with Marcus Hayes, the Philadelphia Daily News. All right, so the Sixers made a draft. And I don't want to belabor the point, but I feel like we're making a big deal about it was a great pick. Sixers had a great draft. Listen, Marcus, I think you, me, and my mom could have sat in the draft room and picked Ben Simmons. That's not what's going to make or define this team. What's going to make and define this team is how they build this team going forward. Brett Brown has said numerous times that this team is not positionally balanced. It's like this is go-to phrase at this point. So what do the Sixers have to do to become a more balanced basketball team?
They need to find a shooter and a point guard in free agency and overpay them, maybe drastically overpay them for the next 2 or 3 years, because they need some stability. They need to have a formula that they can follow that Nerlens Noel, Jahlil Okafor, and especially Joel Embiid can sort of fall into sort of by default. San Antonio, Los Angeles Clippers, the Cleveland Cavaliers very quickly, and the Golden State Warriors in a more deliberate fashion have a system that they run, and the system changes slightly when you bring in a guy like Sean Livingston or Andre Iguodala, but it's still a predictable system, and it's a system that works when it's run to completeness. And if you look in Minneapolis, the Minnesota Timberwolves also have a system, and one of the reasons the Bulls never flourished is because they were so point guard driven and didn't use the rest of their resources as well as they should have. The Sixers need to have a shooter and a point guard, probably 2 point guards, so you have continuity after the first guy goes out or after the first guy gets hurt. They need that in order to develop these wonderful talents that they've acquired. Otherwise, the whole process is flawed. 2 years ago, I was castigated for saying that Sam Hinkie's process, quote-unquote, was a fraud because it had no point guard. Within a month, they acquired Ish Smith, who propelled Nerlens Noel to Rookie of the Year candidacy. Again, at the beginning of the season, I said, T.J. McCollum is not going to get it done, and Marshall's joke. You have to have a point guard to run a team, especially a team of young kids. They should have gotten a guy like Andre Miller. They should have gone after hard a guy like Jameer Nelson. Even if you have to pay them half again or twice what they're worth, you're investing in your young players who are essentially free. These are $4 or $5 million a year players. So that was one of Sam Hinkie's blind spots and one of the reasons why he was a poor general manager overall. He was a great deal maker, and he understands the numbers of the league. And no matter where he lands, he's going to be a huge help to whatever team he's with. That team, I think, will be successful, and in a large part because of him. But he is not the kind of person you want running your team because very basic chemistry and role responsibilities he was just blind to, ignorant of, and dismissive of.
Could I argue, Marcus, that Sam Hinkie was an individual who did not surround himself with the right people in the front office that would be able to take, if he had his strength, he could surround himself with people who had other strength, and as a result, because he was such a dominant force of what his vision was, because he didn't surround himself with people who would question what he was doing, that is part of the reason why that this process, as it's been called, was such a messy thing on the court.
Yes, that's I think that's true. I don't know that he did that intentionally. I don't know if that's his nature, but his regime was one where he shrank from hiring quote-unquote traditional basketball people because he wasn't considered one and was threatened by them. The best executive in Philadelphia's recent history is probably Joe Banner, who built the Eagles just the opposite way. He kept bringing in the best quote-unquote football people he could to, complement the non-quote-unquote football people like himself or Howie Roseman or Don Smolenski. And Don Smolenski and Howie Roseman were wonderful hires who eventually took over for Joe Banner. Jeffrey Lurie realized he didn't need Joe Banner anymore, and Howie Roseman and Don Smolenski took over for him. And it takes two guys to do Joe's one job, but that's the reality of it. You hire people who have the capacity to be great, and then you trust that you're going to be greater still. You're going to be the person that's strong enough and smart enough to, as they grow, you continue to grow. And that happened with Joe for about 20 years. And his next job, Sam Hinkie may grow into that. He may realize that, but he didn't realize it at the time. You're absolutely right.
Marcus, now we have Bryan Colangelo with the Sixers, and it's going to be interesting because the NBA salary cap is going up almost $24 million. I mean, the number is mind-boggling, this salary cap jump. So teams like the Sixers, they have to spend a minimum amount of money. This is not like baseball where you can get away with certain things, either at the high or low end, money-wise. Right. So for the Sixers, they're going to have to go out and spend money. Would it be fair to say that Bryan Colangelo, because I think Bryan Colangelo, he's going to be more defined with what he does with free agency over the next 2 years, where the salary cap is just going to escalate out of control, more so than what he does with the draft?
I don't know. I think it's about 50-50, because when you have a number one overall pick and you have a chance to remake your team by trading other picks and get other picks, this draft, I think, will define him as much as what he does in free agency, because it's probably two free agency crops from the Sixers being a contender, because Embiid, Okafor, and Noel are so far from being complete NBA players, it's laughable. It's almost as if they're typical rookies from 10 or 15 years ago when guys would see in school 2 or 3 years. And you wouldn't expect those guys to contend for titles or make playoff runs. You'd expect it to be 2 or 3 years. So whoever he signs immediately will be less important, I think, than in 2 or 3 years when he makes the big signings, because nobody wants to go through, another 20 to 30 win season, maybe two of them, as in their as in the prime of their careers. So when you're talking about guys who are going to be on the open market, those players would be foolish to come here and waste 2 years just for money that they could probably get somewhere else when they could play meaningful games. It's impossible to explain to people who don't have to play 80, 82 games, knowing they cannot be competitive in half of them and will lose half of the ones they are competitive in. That's a huge burden to carry, to go out there 160 times and know that 80 of them you're going to be a joke. So I think his next crop of free agents, not this one, will sort of tell that tale. And they don't know what they have in Embiid. They don't know what they have in Okafor defensively and whether he's going to come in better shape. And they don't know what they're going to have in Noel, whether he's going to gain weight and not be an offensive albatross.
Marcus, I wanted to ask you before I let you go one non-Sixers related question about LeBron James. We hear so much now about LeBron finally won a title for Cleveland. Where does he stand in the pantheon of basketball history? Is he 1? Is he 3? Is he 5? Where does he rank? And I was saying earlier in the show that I think we need to get away from rankings and just quantify the player's greatness. Like, LeBron James to me is the greatest all-around basketball talent in history, whereas Michael Jordan was the most competitive shooting guard in basketball history. What do you think about that concept? Instead of ranking guys, just try to quantify their greatness.
I think that you're on the right track. I would take it further because the eras change. I mean, we went from a very free-flowing, non-contact, elegant type of basketball through the mid-'80s to a very bruising, slowed down, hand-checking type of basketball through the mid-2000s to, again, a very three-point-centric basketball brand now. So the eras change, everything changes. I go back to, I don't think reporters should vote on Hall of Fames. I think players and Hall of Famers should vote on Halls of Fame. But to me, it's where do you rank in your era? How good a player are you in your era? And right now, LeBron James is probably the most valuable basketball entity in his era because his teams win. He plays incredibly hard. He's flawed, but every player who plays the game is flawed. We want a perfect player. Michael Jordan was not a perfect player. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was the least appreciated great player, was not a perfect player. But I agree with you. There is no next Kevin Durant or LeBron James. There is no next Michael Jordan. We would do ourselves a service if we just appreciated guys for what they have, who they are, and how they compete against each other in the moment. I mean, who's to say Paul George isn't the best all-around player right now, or Kawhi Leonard? It's a matter of taste, and we're in an era right now with the game being called the way it's called, and the number of players really trying to be excellent all around. Where I weep after every NBA Finals because it's 5 or 6 months before I get to watch this beautiful game be played again.
Marcus Hayes, Philadelphia Daily News. I encourage everyone, read his articles, follow him on Twitter, Inkstained Drek. I have so much trouble saying it verbally, but for some reason I'm good at spelling it. I don't know why. But I definitely encourage people to follow Marcus Hayes on Twitter, read his articles in Philadelphia Daily News. Always brings a lot to the table. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Gosh, it's my pleasure. Enjoy Wimbledon.
Hey, coming around the end, you got to cut the grass, right? Get it nice and even.
That's right. The pitch must be perfect.
Marcus, talk to you later.
Thank you.